Hi there. Welcome to a brief video explaining how to design a theory of change. This forms part of our series on the fundamental components making up an M&E framework. My name is Mutakaro Chinyamakovu, and I am from Datalab.Africa. If you are new to our channel, welcome. We talk about all things M&E here, and I hope you enjoy this video. Now, today's agenda, we're going to discuss what a theory of change is and why you should do one. We're also going to do an example of how to design one and how to test whether your theory of change holds. Then we'll go into the best practices and the benefits of doing a theory of change. Now, what is a theory of change? This is a definition from the Civicus organization that they released in 2019. A theory of change is a comprehensive description and an illustration of how and why a desired change is expected to happen in a particular context. You will hear me use the words how and why very often in this video. And my biggest takeaway that I would like you to have is that a theory of change is an illustration. It is a visual strategy document. The reason it is visual is so that you can map what your pathway to change is. How are you going to achieve the impact that you want to see? And what do you need to do in order to get there? Now, why should we do one? A theory of change is a good way to kick off a project if you're at the initiation phase. It is also a good way to get everybody who is involved to collectively understand your vision. This is all of your stakeholders, whether it is your branding team or your marketing team and your finance team and your investors and your strategists and your business development team. Everybody needs to understand what the vision of your program is. What are you trying to achieve? A theory of change gets everybody in the same room, really seeing where they come in, how and why, and what the end goal is. It's a good chance to articulate what the gap is and how you intend to fill it. If you can discuss the problem and understand what the problem is, you can then articulate what are the necessary steps that you need in order to address this problem effectively. A theory of change also helps you to identify the preconditions for success. Sometimes we know what the end goal is, but we don't really know what it will take to get there. When you design a theory of change, you may already have in mind certain activities, but because you're constantly asking yourself how each and every step is going to happen, all the necessary preconditions will emanate from this process. A theory of change also helps you to just plan your project better. When you identify the various milestones that are involved in your project to get to the impact or to get to the goal, you now know where you need to measure, where you need to observe, and whom should be doing the measuring, whom should be doing the activities at the various stages. And it helps you to think ahead of time in a more structured and logical framework. Finally, a theory of change allows us to measure the long-term goals. Now, what do I mean by that? When we run an intervention, it's easy to say, for example, we have run a training and the output of that training is that we have 50 people who have now been trained in, for example, financial skills. But what is the longer term goal of that? Are they now saving? Are they now budgeting? Are they looking for jobs? What are the long-term outcomes that come from that training? A theory of change forces you to think at that level, and because you've already articulated what those long-term outcomes are, you place yourself in a position to be able to measure whether you're achieving those long-term outcomes. And this is the evidence of the impact you make. This is what attracts funding, and this is what makes your projects more sustainable. Now let's go into an example. Suppose I want to equip 50 women in Kagadi, which is in Uganda, to become ECD business owners. Now, Kagadi is a rural district in Uganda. And if this is my goal, I first need to ask myself, before I even start to map anything, on a very high level, think about what is it you want to see change in the society from this intervention. Now, this is where the UN's SDGs become very useful in terms of impact on society. Through this particular intervention, I might be hoping to alleviate poverty situations that these women may be coming from. I may be trying to ensure there's quality education for the learners that enroll in these ECDs in this particular district. I may be wanting to advocate for gender equality by targeting only women. And because I'm trying to have them become business owners as opposed to just get employed, I'm ensuring that they have good jobs that are sustainable and that there's economic growth in their societies, because their businesses will likely also end up creating jobs. And finally, and this one may be a little bit far-fetched, sustainable cities and communities. If I wanted to hit a fifth SDG here, I might say, instead of these women starting an ECD in their backyard, let's see if there are any churches, for example, that are open and not in use from Monday to Friday, or any state halls, any buildings that we can repurpose and utilize for the benefit of the society during the week in a way that enhances that community. And I would have hit SDG 3. I'm sorry, SDG 11. Now, this is on a very high level. We're talking about the impact that I want to see in the society from this intervention. And at this stage, my mind is now ready to think about what outcomes I want to see from this goal. What are the main things that I expect to emanate from my initiative? I may want to see sustainable employment for women. I would want to see rural economic development through job creation. I would want to see safe places for children to learn and grow, and parents having free time to also look for work and also enhance their own economic status. These are the pillars on which my goal stands. If I can achieve these outcomes, then I have bettered my society in Kagadi. Now, if these are the pillars, if these are the main objectives that I want to achieve through this intervention, the next question is how? How am I going to achieve these outcomes? If I ensure that the women are trained in ECD business development, I ensure that there is sustainable employment for them. Another output, if I ensure that they're trained in personal financial management, if I ensure that they have learned how to do curriculum design and sensory and motor skill development activities, and if I ensure they have an enrollment plan for their business and registration procedures, then I'll be able to achieve the outcomes that I've set out to achieve. We can go one level down. How am I going to achieve these particular outputs? Let's go a bit more detailed. Now, these would be the activities that my project team is actually going to be doing in order to achieve these outputs and ultimately the outcomes. Training is going to be key. They need to be trained in what an ECD is and how it works. They need to be trained in business development, in personal financial management. They need to know how to handle their staff. They need to know how to grow their business. How do you plan for the future? How do you plan for emergencies to ensure that you're sustainable? And finally, they need to know how to design curriculum so that they can keep these little children busy. Another activity outside from training is identifying locations. Where are these 50 women going to be placing their ECDs? I would also need to ensure they obtain certifications. They may also benefit from having support groups where they can bounce off of one another when they have challenges and when they need support. I would also encourage them to lobby their ideas with the school governing bodies in the area. This is to ensure that the children that come out of their ECDs, that graduate out of their ECDs, have placement and are welcomed into schools that are in the area. Now, when I have my list of activities, I know what I want to do. I now need to think about how I am going to do these activities. So what resources am I going to put into my organization to get the project rolling? This is where we talk about funding. We talk about training partners who are going to run all of these workshops, partnering with the various suppliers that these women need to get their businesses off the ground, learning materials, catering suppliers, cleaning supplies. And we might also think about ECD staff. Whom are they going to hire? Where are they going to hire them from? Are they going to be qualified? And we also need to identify who is enrolling into the school. Now, we've articulated our theory of change, in a sense, backwards. If you're new to this channel, this may surprise you. If you are not, you already know that I'm a fan of backwards design. If I can take a moment just to advocate for backwards design, when I was in school, I would study with past papers. I would look at the past papers first so that I know what I need to study. If I know what is expected of me, then I know how to prepare. And that's essentially what we're doing here. What is expected? What are the outcomes? What would ensure that I achieve my goal? And then we work backwards to think about, okay, then how do we get there? How do we achieve these outcomes? How do we achieve these outputs? By doing these activities. How do we do these activities? By ensuring we have the necessary funding, training partners, and other inputs to make the project run efficiently. My inputs essentially feed into my activities. If I do all of my activities, I expect that I will manage to achieve the outputs that I have. And if I achieve all of my outputs in a perfect world, I would achieve all of my outcomes, and this would help me achieve the goal that I have set out to achieve and the impact on society. Now, let's talk about how to test this theory of change. As you might have guessed, this is not an exhaustive example. So how do we test if our theory of change holds? First of all, we need to ask ourselves, is the goal clear? If you have a singular focused goal, that is gold. That's really, really good for harnessing your efforts in one direction. You need to ask yourself if you have addressed the SDGs to think about what impact you are making. Now, my goal was threefold. There's gender equality, there's education, there's rural economic development in there. So it is not singular focused, which makes it a bit of a complex project. And that requires a complex theory of change as well. Sometimes if you have multiple stakeholders on your project, you might have a project that involves, for example, different government ministries, or even on a global level, different global organizations that each have their own theory of change and impact that they want to make in the society. You may end up needing to make separate theory of change diagrams that you then harness into one over time so that everybody is focused on achieving the same goal. Now, the second thing I need to ask myself when I'm testing my theory of change is whether the causal links hold. Is it clear how one milestone leads to the next and leads to the next? You will also want to ask yourself whether it's clear how you are going to achieve the various things you set to achieve. And you read your theory of change backwards to do this. Ask yourself, how are you going to achieve your impact? How are you going to achieve your outcomes? How are you going to achieve your outputs, etc.? And then it's also important to understand why you are doing what you are doing. So as much as you ask yourself why, also read your theory of change forwards. Why are you doing the activities that you have set out to do? Is that output or outcome necessary? If we go back to the slide just to see how this works. Now, it's important to test our causal links, as we mentioned, because it may happen that the ECDs are not successful and women's businesses are closing down and we don't understand why. When we look at our data and investigate, we may find that, oh, a lot of them are still using their personal bank accounts as their business bank accounts, which is poor financial planning. And that might be happening because perhaps we didn't put them through the personal financial management training. So causal links are really important to follow. Think about whether you have included everything that your beneficiary group needs in order to be able to hit the outcomes that you've set out for them. If we want to test whether our theory of change holds backwards by asking how, for example, we may want to look at this output here, curriculum and sensory and motor skill development activities. How will we ensure that they are trained in this area? We can go back to the activities and see, oh, there we are. We're going to ensure that they are trained in those areas by having a curriculum design training activity. This is what ensures that they are able to have these activities in their ECD. If we want to test the theory of change forwards, this time by asking why, we can take an example. Let's look at the activity lobby with school governing bodies. Why do we want them to lobby with school governing bodies? We mentioned earlier, it's so that they have school placements for primary school. When they graduate out of ECD, they need to have a place where they know that they are welcome in that community. And you need to then check your outputs. Did we include here anything to do with school placements for primary school? And we did not. So here is where you either add in the output for primary placement, or if you realize that perhaps lobbying with school governing bodies is not a necessary activity, then you take it out. If you have something that you're asking yourself, well, why are we doing this? Is that something we need? If the output is not necessary for the outcomes, then just leave it out. And that is how we test our theory of change. Clarity of the goal, checking if the causal links hold, asking how when we read it backwards, and asking why when we read it forwards. Now, what are some of the best practices when we are designing our theory of change? If you're an M&E practitioner, I would suggest that you do a draft theory of change for yourself first. This is so that by the time you involve everybody else, you already have an idea of how everything links together. Next, use a participatory approach. This is really key. Get your stakeholders in the room, get everybody who is invested in this program's success in the room, ideally people who have already bought in or who are interested, maybe not bought in 100%, but just interested to hear more about this project and how it's going to run. Do not force anybody into a theory of change workshop. It is a very mindful exercise that really needs you to concentrate and to contribute effectively. When you use the participatory approach, you'll notice that as you're developing it, people will buy into the idea. It really energizes the room and gets people thinking about what are the best ways to achieve this. And also think about impact. How do we make sure that the society is better for this intervention? Next, when you've already met with the stakeholders and they've bought into your story or your change story or your impact story, you can now finalize your deliverable and have them review it. The example I showed you is by no means a finalized theory of change, but it's close. Once everybody has given their inputs and developed it from scratch together, you compare what everybody put together with your draft. And you finalize a theory of change document. You start off with the context to explain what the problem area is and what they're addressing with this project. Then you show them the flow chart. And this can be in whatever format you like, but it does have to be visually compelling. And then you give them some next steps. This may be inputs into what needs to be considered for the program design now that the change story is solid. And they will now be able to review and ask the relevant questions about whether they can do certain activities, whether they have the resources, what they can do now and what they have to do later. And so you may find that you still have to edit it after this review. Finally, it's always a good idea to have a very simple visual. Theory of change documents can get pretty complex, and complex diagrams generally aren't accepted very well. If you have a simple visual, perhaps even go as far as having animations in your diagram to represent different elements of it. This helps people to really understand what the main thoughts are, what are the main paths to change, and what are the main milestones that they need to bear in mind and contribute to. Now, finally, I'd like to leave you with just the benefits that I have found from practicing theory of change development using a participatory approach. When you have everybody in the room designing a theory of change together, it really helps to get the core vision clarified. You will find that they will go back and forth between the vision as they're deciding what milestones are important, why they're doing certain things, how they're going to do them. Does it impact the actual vision? You'll find that they'll ask themselves over and over again, well, what is the actual vision? Do we want gender equality, or do we just want children to learn in a safe environment? Maybe we should be more clear about that. Theory of change workshops really help to come to that clarity. Second, you get buy-in from your stakeholders when you use the participatory approach. As I mentioned, it tends to be a very energizing activity, very mindful. If you try to do it with a board and paper and colors and in some kind of physical sense with physical materials, you really can capture people's attention for an entire day just working on clarifying this change story. And my favorite experience is when people don't even think to look at their laptops or their cell phones because they're invested in really understanding how they're going to get from the resources they have to this change they want to see and to impacting the society in the way that maybe they hadn't really thought was possible until you're actually articulating what you can do to impact society in this way. And finally, inspiration. This inspiration can often lead to a pitch deck, my absolute favorite end result, because when you come up with a vision, generally you'll come up with one pitch deck. A theory of change will give you the various paths to change. We may be talking about gender equality as we did in our example. We may be talking about safe environments to learn. We may be talking about rural economic development. And depending on who we're talking to in terms of getting funding, we want to pitch it as one of the three primarily. And so the theory of change helps you to see how can I pitch it as a gender equality project? How can I pitch it as a rural economic development project? And how can you get the most funding to bring your project to life? Now, this is where we'll stop for today. I'd love to show you different examples of theory of change diagrams, and I'll do that in a separate video. Thank you very much for listening. If you liked this video, you can follow us at Datalab.Africa. You can also contact me on the email above, mutsa@datalab.africa, and I'd be happy to chat further if you need any capacity building M&E work, or if you need assistance with the theory of change as you've just seen now here. If you have not yet subscribed, please do subscribe to this channel, give us a thumbs up, and share. Thanks, and see you again soon.